the broadcast because I think how's it going, everybody? We're gonna get started in just 7 minutes. We're really excited. We got some folks jumping on early.
Hey,
We got the candidates.
Is it going to be live streamed?
Yeah, this is live stream on DC4D's page.
Great, thanks.
Start the live stream right now.
Back door.
We're going to just get started in just a few minutes. Want to thank the panelists for jumping on early. Let's make sure you're muted if you're not. We're just getting started in just a few minutes. It's a little bit early. Thank everyone for showing up early. I know you a long time to coming out. Really appreciate it. Candidates, if you can hear me, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay.
There was a little bit of a choppiness though when you were just talking.
Yeah.
Candidates, can you hear me clearly? Can you give me a thumbs up? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly? Okay. Christina, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thumbs up. Chandler, can you hear me? Thumbs up. Rick, can you hear me? Thumbs up.
Hey, Jeremiah. Jeremiah. Just want to confirm the pronunciation. Chander.
Jeremiah, you're on mute.
Yes. How's it going, everybody? We're going to get started in just a few seconds. We're going to get started in just a few seconds. We got about 3 more minutes, y'all, till we get started. Uh, see, we got Marcus Batcher on. Thank you, Marcus. Everything good?
All set, man. Thanks for taking care of me.
No problem. Candidates, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Awesome. So we're going to get started in just 1 minute. And when we get started, Marcus, you will be first just a little bit, okay? Okay, welcome to the DC4D Candidate Forum. Let me first start out by thanking the at-large candidates for being with us tonight. I really appreciate it. As we all know, this has been some really trying times, not just for our city, but for our nation. And it's been really a rough ride, but I've been really inspired to see the city come together and solve a lot of the issues currently facing us right now. And I'm really hopeful that our city will be able to, be able to come out strong from this crisis. But let me first say I really appreciate the candidates for joining us tonight, as well as our audience. We had over 300 people who have RSVP'd to this forum tonight. We had over 100 questions submitted from all parts of the city. And we expect to have a very robust discussion tonight. And so let's get started. Let me first start out by thanking the steering committee, Noah, Elizabeth, Keith, Chelsea, Hugh, Jeremy, in case you had to recuse yourself from this process. And also thank everyone who submitted questions throughout the city, as well as our audience tonight. So I really appreciate everyone for joining us. Here's the run of show tonight. First, we're going to have opening statements. Candidates are going to have 90 seconds for their opening statements. You'll be able to see, candidates will be able to see the timer on their screen. For those in the audience, if you actually don't want to see the timer itself, you can just click on the candidate's image, and that will enlarge the candidate's image instead of seeing the actual timer. So candidates will have 90 seconds for opening statements, 1 minute for questions. So we're gonna have 1 minute questions, 3 1-minute questions. And then we're gonna move into 30-second questions where candidates will have 30 seconds to answer the question. And then we're gonna end by having a lightning round, raise your hand questions. And so if candidates respond with yes, they'll raise their hand. If they respond with no, they'll keep their hands down. And then we'll close and wrap up, and that'll be the night. And so we're gonna start with opening statements. And The list of the order goes Marcus Batchelor, Marcus Goodwin, Christina, Chandler, Ed, Janae, Rick, Will, Monica, Eric, Ann, and Robert will start us off with opening statements. So I'm gonna
Just
kick it
want
off
to
to
confirm
Marcus.
it's Chander.
Chander, sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that. So I'm gonna kick it over to Marcus to start us off with opening statements.
Sure. Thanks, Jeremiah. And I want to thank DC4D for having us tonight. I'm Marcus Batchelor. I'm honored to be in this race with so many thoughtful, progressive leaders. And I trust tonight you'll realize that many of us share similar core values. I stand for truly affordable housing, equitably and fully funded public schools in every community, and a moral economy that expands and protects the dignity of living wage work. I'm fighting for healthy, safe, and accessible communities that are ripe with opportunity and also free from gun violence. And it's good to talk about these values, but what distinguishes me is that I haven't just spent my career in a room studying these issues. I've spent my life on the ground experiencing them and working to solve them. I grew up in this city and then devoted my career in civil service, nonprofits, and as an elected leader to the people of DC. We need leadership on the council right now with the kind of lived experience that makes that work possible. Our campaign is focused on building a citywide coalition behind intersectional solutions that speak to the moment we're facing. I'm gonna be laser focused on advancing a progressive vision that moves our city forward, but doesn't move past the people who need this vision achieved the most. Our leadership has been failing us, and COVID-19 is arming them with an excuse to continue to drop the ball. We can't allow our city to keep bending to the will of developers, power brokers, and education profiteers. We have to reimagine the way our government works, root out corruption that's impeding progress for decades, and charge forward with proven ethical leadership. Thanks, and I look forward to talking tonight.
Marcus Goodwin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Marcus Goodwin. I'm running to be your next at-large, independent, at-large council member. I'm a DC native. I'm the fifth of 8 children in my family, so I've learned a lot about balancing conflict and building consensus. I'm focused on making DC a more equitable city to bridge the wealth gap that has grown here. My work experience has been in housing and economic development. So among these candidates, I'm uniquely qualified to do this. Tonight, I want to talk about my 6-point plan for how I'll improve DC. First, I'm focusing on financial responsibility. That means focusing on balancing our budget so that a control board doesn't come back by cutting out wasteful spending, utilizing excess reserves, finding new revenue sources, and advocating for our fair share from the federal government, as well as creating an inventory of our real estate assets to determine what we should do. I'm focused on, second, eradicating DC's food deserts by designing economic incentives to encourage the development of both community and commercial grocery stores. Third, I'm focused on crime and improving safety by addressing the underlying causes of crime before they occur: underemployment, job training, affordable childcare, treating addiction. Fourth, I'm focused on improving the quality of our local education. I want to bridge the digital divide by providing laptops and Wi-Fi access to all children. Fifth, I'm focused on economic development and helping our local and small businesses recover from the economic impact of COVID-19. And sixth, I want to invest in our infrastructure, streets, alleys, roads, and building more bike lanes, repairing our public housing. Thank you, and I look forward to talking tonight.
Christina.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining. My name is Christina Henderson. A little bit about me. My entire career has been in public service. I've helped get good people elected to office. I've worked for a couple of school systems. I've advised and worked with United States senators. And for 5 years, I had the privilege of serving the residents of the District of Columbia. First, working at DC Public Schools, and then for 4 years, working for the DC Council. Councilmember David Grasso's first legislative director, and then for 2 years, I served as the committee director for the Committee on Education. I'm running because I believe our city is at a crossroads in deciding how we want to move forward. If we want to move forward where everyone has the ability to engage and benefit from the growth and change that is happening in this city. And we know that over the years, that hasn't necessarily happened and been the case. I'm focused on policies that are going to make DC more equitable and sustainable for us all. a couple of top issues and policies that I hope we get a chance to discuss tonight: access to healthcare, early care and early learning, so childcare, equitable growth and affordable housing, and then of course, public safety. These are issues that I care deeply about, and those were issues that I worked on while I was at the council, and I would be honored to have the opportunity to get back to that work and do it again. So I'm looking forward to the conversation this evening. Thanks.
You can go, Chandler.
Hi, I'm Chandra J. Raman. I'm running as the only true independent in the at-large council race. I'm running to put people back to work and get city government to refocus on its core responsibilities. I bring a track record of producing results when I managed a job training program at the Latin American Youth Center that prepared young adults without a high school diploma or GED find successful pathways. I fought for the full inclusion of people with disabilities in our schools, in jobs, and in our communities. I'm currently a small business owner working in the field of emergency preparedness planning for the past 17 years. I've also been elected to serve as an ANC commissioner for the past 8 years, with the last 4 as chair or vice chair. I bring people together, help them find common ground, and solve problems. In response to the coronavirus, the mayor has done an admirable job of leading the city through the crisis using science and public health data. But now comes the hard part. We need to bring people together, and the hard part is the recovery, making sure we come back even stronger than before. Coming out of COVID, we need a leader who can balance the needs of businesses and residents, who puts forth policies that build from the bottom up, not from the top down, who's open to innovative ideas that create efficiencies in our government and produce real results. I'm Chandra J. Raman. Now more than ever, we need a leader with a new way of thinking on the DC Council. I am that leader.
Thank you. Ed?
Unmute myself. Great.
You're
Well,
unmuted.
yeah. Well, thank you all for being here and for being engaged voters. I'm Ed Lazier, and it was over 20 years ago when my sons were just little boys that I decided I wanted to devote my career to making DC a more humane and fair city. And I did that by leading the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, where I worked to bring attention to DC's most glaring inequities, like the fact that in the past 10 years, despite economic recovery, median income for Black households did not change at all. I worked to master the DC budget, and I partnered with people across the city to fight for budgets that address those challenges. I'm really proud of what I've accomplished, like leading efforts to require employers to provide paid sick leave to their employees and steering more resources to high poverty schools. I worked with DC for D on many issues as well, including fighting for progressive taxation and affordable housing, and I'm honored that the DC for Democracy endorsed me in 2018. I'm running now because I want to do more. It broke my heart when I would walk to my office in NOMA, past tent encampments, and then head into my office knowing that I had budget information at my fingertips to show that DC could and should be doing better. I think it's wrong that DC leads the nation in displacing Black residents. And I'm frustrated that we have leaders who say they care, but then don't do enough. This crisis that is falling so hard on Black and brown residents reminds us why leadership is so important right now. More than ever, we need leaders who care and understand DC's inequities, who know how to use DC's budget to get the most out of it, and who know how to build coalitions to get things done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. Jan, you can go. Jan.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Janae Lewis, and I'm running as an independent for at-large city council. I'm from the DC area, and I fell in love with DC when I was a kid. My mom was a DC public school teacher and taught school all over town. And my parents worked really hard to send me to private school, so I went to high school in DC at Georgetown Visitation. I went away to college and lived all over the country. And I started my career doing faith-based community organizing in the South and in the Midwest. This taught me how to work with different kinds of people, how to navigate power, and how to build accountability. And I brought that approach to my career and everything else that I've done mostly working in social justice nonprofits across the country and here in DC. When I came back to DC in 2010, I quickly saw that the growth and prosperity was not only leaving people out, it was pushing people out. And what upset me more is that so many different kinds of people wanted to do something about it, but didn't feel empowered to make an impact. So that's why I convened conversations in all 8 boards before I launched my campaign to build a collective vision for our city. And the vision conversations inform my platform for equitable development, sustainable housing, and excellent schools. The COVID crisis has required us to take emergency actions, but the vision still holds. We can still provide capital and assistance for longstanding small businesses and support cooperative models of business and employee ownership. Now more than ever, we must fully fund the Way Home campaign and produce and preserve housing that is truly affordable and spacious enough for families. And we can still require clear school level budgets for all publicly funded schools so that every student can have a safe school close to home that helps them learn. Again, I'm Janae Lewis, and I'm looking forward to our conversation this evening.
Thank you, Janae. Rick?
Thank you, Jeremiah. I'm Rick Murphy. I'm a veteran, educator, small business owner, neighbor, father, and Washingtonian. I'm running for the at-large seat to unite the city, bring transparency and accountability to the government, and make the district work for Washingtonians who have invested so much into the city. The city owes a debt to those families and communities that we have yet to repay. We need someone that is a fighter, mission-driven, collaborative leader, ready and willing to fight for the entire community and is not owned and bought by those already in power or special interest groups. With 3 decades of service in the U.S. Army, serving as a college professor, an administrator, a small business owner, and businessman, I have what it takes to fight on behalf of all the residents of this city. This is not a luxurious or easy job, but it is about improving our community for all Washingtonians so that the system works for everybody and not just a few people. We need somebody who is committed. I promise you I will have my commitment just like I did when I served in the Army and when I led the future of tomorrow in our classrooms. We have so many communities in the city that systems are not equally working for, such as youth, LGBTQ, small business owners, Black and brown communities, immigrant communities, veterans, reentry population, and many, many, many others. With your support, you have my commitment to work for you and you only. With your support, you have my promise that I will say no to being bought and paid for by those special interest groups. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Next up is Will.
Hi, my name is Will Merrifield. I've spent the last 8 years working as a housing attorney at the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, representing tenants on the front lines of the housing struggles at Congress Heights, Brooklyn Manor, and across the district. Working on the ground as an attorney and organizer in these communities has shown me the systems that govern DC failed us long before the pandemic. We need a fundamental change to build stable, thriving communities from the ground up. My team and I are running on a Green New Deal recovery plan. This plan is anchored by a public infrastructure project and guaranteed jobs program to build thousands of units of social housing to solve the affordable housing crisis. Social housing is a proven model of publicly controlled, permanently affordable, mixed income housing that pays for itself. This, plus intentional investment in strong neighborhood public schools and public health infrastructure, will lay the foundation for safer and healthier communities. I've sat across the table from developers and fought to protect people's housing before COVID. Now powerful interests are fighting for the post-pandemic DC they want. As we sit here, there is a development lobbying group asking for $1 billion from the DC government. If we want a recovery that really does meet the needs of the many and not the few, we're gonna have to fight for it. And I'm ready to do that.
Thank you, Will. Monica?
Good evening. Thank you to DC for Democracy for hosting this important forum, and thank you to everyone who's joining remotely. My name is Monica Palacio, and I'm running for the at-large seat on the City Council. I'm an advocate, I'm a mom, I'm a lawyer, I'm a civil rights attorney, and most of all, I'm the first Latina to run for the DC City Council in the history of this city, and I believe I bring the leadership and the experience we need for the next 4 years. Some of you may know me in my former role as a director of the DC Office of Human Rights. I was appointed to serve over 6 years under 2 mayors. And in that agency, I oversaw thousands of investigations into civil rights violations in the context of housing, education, employment, and also in access to government services. So part of my role was actually oversight and enforcement of DC agencies in their work. DC is a city that I love and cherish. I want to be able to think about the next 4 years and our priorities in terms of reinvesting in families and communities that are being devastated today by COVID-19. We need to redesign our workforce and rebuild small businesses so that together they can thrive. And we also need to reimagine education so that all of our children, whether they're distance learning or sitting in the same building learning, are treated as a whole child and all of their needs are met. So thank you for this forum tonight, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Monica. Is Eric on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Having a little technical issues with my video, so I'm going to do it by phone until I can get my internet back up. But hello, everyone. I'm Eric Rogers, and I'm running for the at-large seat on the DC Council. As a DC native, I've witnessed my hometown undergo significant change. I've seen new residents move in. I've seen new amenities pop up all over the city. I've seen distressed commercial corridors become vibrant centers of new economic strength and activity. And the city has made significant investments by building new schools, rec centers, libraries across all 8 wards. But we still have a lot more to do. And as DC continues to grow, we need to create a city where economic opportunity is not just for the selected few. There's still too many residents left out, with too many residents shaken by crime. Too many of our kids are struggling to get a good education. So if elected, my mission is to provide robust, innovative, and effective leadership for all residents citywide. You know, transparent and efficient government operations are crucial to the district's pandemic recovery process. So in the near term and over the coming years, the council is going to face continuing and evolving challenges related to our response and recovery. And that's where bold and vigorous actions are going to be necessary to maintain the city's financial health, ensure that DC residents fully recover from the crisis, while also working with agencies to continue to improve operations and services. I have 2 decades of long and distinguished government service, working in government reform and innovation, and look forward to the fruitful conversation to proceed.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate it. So next up is Ann. Is Ann on the call? Is Ann on the video? I don't see Ann here. So next up is Councilmember Robert White.
Thanks so much to DC for Democracy for hosting this. I'm at-large Councilmember Robert White. I'm very proud to be with you today. When I ran for office, I ran because I was seeing the city change, and with it, the displacement of so many people, including my family, the loss of businesses that I grew up around, and not seeing enough voices really sticking up for the people who are falling through the cracks. So when I got onto the council, I really made economic diversity and equity a priority issue. I am proud to have introduced some of the boldest and most progressive legislation that we have seen on the council, including the Restore the Vote Act, a bill that restores a vote for incarcerated felons, many of whom lost the right to vote during Jim Crow, and along with it, their voice and protection in our democracy. I wrote the Begin Act, one of the most expansive early childhood education bills in the country, worked with Councilmember Vincent Gray to get this bill passed as the Birth to All DC Act. This puts DC on the road to universal early childhood education. Recently, I got past the Check It bill, which helped 3 businesses that were under threat of being displaced on Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue on Ward 8, help them buy their building with city funds so that they control the future of their building. I went to the Matt for Washington Met High School for students who were on their last opportunity to succeed as the city was closing their schools. I have focused on transparency, accountability, and integrity, and that's what I want to continue to bring in a second term on the council.
Thank you, Councilmember. Noah, did you want to say something for like 30 seconds?
Yes. So thanks, everybody. This is Noah Van Gilder. I'm the Ombudsman for DC for Democracy, and I am your timekeeper for this evening. So we are getting some reports that rather than seeing the candidates' faces be large, instead what you're seeing is a giant countdown timer, which is probably not exactly the image we want to project. So what I'm going to do instead is, rather than using a screen share to show the timer, what I'll do is keep time on my own, and I will send a chat message to all the participants when your time has expired. Just to be clear, this does not change the amount of time you'll be given, just how you'll be notified, so we don't have the creepy countdown clock looming over all of us. So thank you for your patience with that.
Hello? Hi, Robert. I'm on now. Sorry. I don't know if they can let me in.
Ann, you have 30 seconds. You want a minute? You got a minute for your opening statement.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So sorry. I think I called in too early and I thought I was on. But thank you. I'm Ann Wilcox. I'm the Statehood Green candidate for the at-large seat. We have ballot status, so I will be on the ballot in November. As many people remember, the Statehood Party started back when Home Rule started. And our founder, Julius Hobson, was this firebrand who let rats go in Georgetown to try to get the attention of the power brokers. And we just went on from there in pursuit of statehood. We had a member named Hilda Mason, who was our longtime council member. I am a lawyer. I went to law school here in the 1980s. I have practiced in landlord-tenant and public interest law. I represent protesters, a lot of the protesters you see around town. I've worked with through the National Lawyers Guild. And I was also a Ward 2 school board member from 94 to 98, just before the control board came in. So I have that experience as well. But the Statehood Green Party considers ourselves the longtime progressive party. And so we look forward to carrying that banner in the election. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann. I really appreciate it. So now we're going to get into a 1-minute questions. So candidates, you actually have 1 minute to answer questions. To answer these 3 questions. And so if you're not speaking, make sure you are muted. Because there were a few times when candidates were trying to give their opening statement, folks did not have their mute button on. So if you're not speaking, make sure you have your mute button on. And so we're going to get started with the first question of the night. So this question was submitted by Jane. What is your assessment of DC family homelessness and affordable housing policies in actual practice? What is your housing vision? You have 1 minute, Marcus.
Sure, thanks for the question. I think it's super important that we really hone in on making sure that our families most in need, our poorest families, get access to the quality housing, and that we use the Housing Production Trust Fund, quite frankly, not just as a slush fund for developers, but that we really invest deeply in the family housing we need, but also the deeply affordable housing we need. So I'm going to be hyper-focused on making sure we increase our stock of affordable housing available for folks making 30% AMI and below. And I also think we need to reimagine and have a new vision about how we do public housing in this city. The federal government has already drawn their line in the sand. They're saying they're getting out of the public housing business. And as a member of the council, I'm going to make sure we advance a vision for locally controlled public housing that really lifts up our poorest residents, put them in a space where they can grow and thrive, and gives them the dignity and quality of housing that they deserve. So I look forward to doing that as a member of the council. Thanks, Noah.
Marcus Goodwin.
Thank you for the question. I'm the only candidate who's worked profoundly in building affordable housing here in the District of Columbia, applying for Housing Production Trust Fund dollars, managing multi-million-dollar budgets, and then delivering these into communities to ensure that the housing provided matches the needs in terms of 0 to 30% AMI in certain communities, but also has security features, provides community space and amenities to ensure that we're building communities that's making DC a more equitable city. I want to ensure that the DOPA program, the District Opportunity to Purchase Act, is actually utilized. We have many of our homeless residents that are being housed temporarily in an indefinite state in some of the lower end hotels that are in the district. I want to ensure that these people move on to more permanent housing options. We need to create and double down on our housing production trust fund investment to ensure that going forward, more and more of our time, thank you, that's my time.
Christina?
Yeah, thank you. I first want to say I strongly believe that housing is a right. And I feel like our policies in the city should reflect that value that we have. And so when it comes to talk about affordable housing, I would be focused on building affordable housing for families. We build a lot of studios and 1-bedroom units in the city, and we call them affordable, but we know that if you're a family and you have children, that's not something that's great for you. And I also believe that the council needs to focus more on housing preservation. We focus a lot on housing production, but we also have a housing preservation fund. How do we keep houses in affordability for perpetuity? Why is the city not purchasing more homes around the city as residents decide to either downsize or move on? And then we flip those properties ourselves to provide more affordability in places across the city. I think when you talk about affordability, you also have to talk about public housing as well. And I echo Marcus's comments around we need a strong plan around how we fix and sustain the public housing that we currently have, because if we lose that stock, we will be further behind than where we already are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up is Chandler.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I think workforce housing is the future, and we have to encourage development at the core of our city. If we don't do that, we'll keep sending dollars that are earned right here in the district flowing out to the suburbs. And we need to think innovatively about repurposing some of our buildings to residential use. And we must provide opportunities for seniors who want to keep homes in their family. And part of it is to help seniors rehab their house and rent it out. Currently, we have a requirement that requires that any new developments have 35% of the units be affordable. Well, we should carve out some of those for our frontline workers, such as police, nurses, and teachers, serving our city, but they can't afford to live here. And I think we need to make policies that allow our officers and our firefighters and our teachers to live right here in our neighborhoods. That's how we invest in our neighborhoods, and that's how we invest in our people.
Thank you, Ed.
I mean, this pandemic is like the most important reminder of just how important housing is to the security of our lives. In fact, housing is life right now, right? And I've seen the difference that affordable housing can make to a family that is struggling to pay the rent, that is facing frequent moves and eviction and homelessness. I've particularly seen what stable housing can mean to help children develop. And that's why in my career, I have focused on affordable housing from the beginning, including nearly 20 years ago, pushing for the Housing Production Trust Fund to serve our poorest families, being there to help create the local rent supplement program that helps so many families pay rent, and fighting in recent years to preserve and protect public housing. As a council member, I will push the mayor and hold my council colleagues accountable to ending homelessness and fully addressing the city's affordable housing needs over the next decade. I will work to ensure that not a single DC resident loses their home as a result of this pandemic, which would be a shame. And I will fight to implement the Reclaim Rent Control platform to close the loopholes in our rent control program and stabilize all renters. Thank you.
Ed. Thank you, Ed. Next up is Janae.
So regarding homelessness specifically, I strongly support the Way Home campaign, and there's a clear plan there to end chronic homelessness, particularly in light of the COVID crisis. I think the emergency rental assistance program is critical right now and should be expanded because we anticipate that more people are going to need that program. I also support many of the items in the rent control platform, particularly prohibiting the use of voluntary agreements. But when we think long-term about vision for housing in the city, that can't provide sustainable housing on its own. So we also need to look at what's causing homelessness. It's not only renters, it's also homeowners who are experiencing homelessness. So I would incentivize the conversion of rental housing to cooperative housing and create land trusts for teachers, firefighters, and police officers, as well as looking for homes that are up for auction, single family homes, and make sure that those homes that are up for auction are offered to homesteaders first before developers.
Thank you, Rick.
Yes, currently we have a pandemic in which we have a stay-at-home order. There are many residents, and disproportionately to impact communities of color, that they don't have a home to go to. So they have no place to stay at home too. And it's something that we need to focus on in the future. We have low-income housing, we have affordable housing. Affordable housing for those school teachers, firefighters, and police officers, and being able to allow them to live in the community in which they work and they serve us as residents here. We need to work on programs like for teachers with assistant down payment programs. We need to work on keeping those seniors in houses so that they can afford to continue to live here and property tax does not get out of control for them. Long-term Washingtonians and not allowing them to be pushed out by the cost of housing. Then we need to focus on low-income housing. And low-income housing, that is not the end-all be-all. That is a symptom to a problem, and we need to fix the problem. We need to offer education programs for those who are in low-income housing and get them through a vocational or a degree-granting program. We need to follow up with getting them viable employment that's going to give them a livable wage. We need to get them into the low-income housing, but at the same time, we need to solve the problem and not just continue to put Band-Aids on the symptoms.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. Next up is Will.
Our housing policy in Washington, D.C. has completely failed, and it is a completely irrational system. What we do in Washington, D.C., and I know this because I've been seeing how the sausage is made for the last 8 years. I've been working against developers displacing people. What we do in Washington, D.C. is we give away hundreds of millions of dollars each year, taxpayer dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of public land each year to private developers to build luxury apartments that nobody can afford. And we DC government stokes the affordable housing crisis by doing this. The private market will never create housing as a human right. If we want housing as a human right, if we want to solve the affordable housing crisis, we have to move out of the private market. We have to move towards a social housing model. This is the anchor that this is an anchor of my platform that my campaign is running on. Social housing is a model that's proven, it's efficient, it works in many parts of the world. In Vienna, Austria, 60% of the rental housing market.
Thank you, Will. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
We're gonna fight next.
Monica, you're up next.
Thank you. So when I served under the last job I had under Mayor Bowser, I served leading a team, a racial equity cohort, thinking about anti-displacement zones so that we can preserve housing in our city. However, there's a before and an after that I think we have to face when it comes to housing. The city is facing a $1.5 billion recession and revenue shortfall over the next 2 years. It's going to be very challenging to continue to spend to find solutions. I think one way that we can preserve housing is by defending our families' rights to access that housing, by fighting against discrimination for families that are using vouchers, and fighting against discrimination for families that have more than 1 or 2 children, or who have a family member with a disability. The housing we have is not even accessible. So I think we need to start by thinking about how to strategically invest in protecting our rights to that housing right now, because the ability to spend is going to be quite limited in the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you, Monica. Eric?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, the affordability factor of DC housing, definitely has risen significantly over the last 20 years, displacing many long-term Black DC residents. And I think during these challenging times and continuing through this decade, we need to redouble our efforts to ensure housing security for our most vulnerable populations. If elected, I intend to maintain our commitment to the Housing Production Trust Fund to produce new affordable housing, but also ensuring our rental support programs have the resources necessary to match the need. The district has many tools to tackle housing affordability, and we've committed significant resources to the problem, but I do want to, and we need to invest more in these housing programs, but I do plan on providing effective oversight to ensure that our scarce housing dollars are being spent wisely. And the city also needs to start really thinking about how to use the DOPA program, as mentioned earlier, to start tackling some of the affordability issues that we have in multifamily units.
Thank you, Eric. Next up is Ann.
Yes, thank you. And again, it's a pleasure to be here with this group of candidates, a lot of whom are good friends. I wanted to highlight the need to expand rent control. We have the we need to extend the new reforms that Anita Bond's committee is talking about. When I worked at University Legal Services back in the early 90s, Will, which is another housing counseling agency, even at that time, new construction was considered construction before 1976, which was a long time ago. And that year needs to be brought forth closer so that more construction is covered by rent control. We also need to have greater legal protections for tenants who are in landlord-tenant court. Most tenants go to landlord-tenant court with no attorney, and at the best, they would get maybe a law student who assists them. We have one reform, which is the Housing Conditions Court, which allows tenants to take their tenant housing code violations to a judge and have those addressed. But we need to do a lot more by way of preserving housing before it falls.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it. Robert?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I want to make sure we don't miss the link between homelessness and mental health and substance abuse in DC. If we miss that link, we will never solve this issue. And my hat's off to organizations like Jubilee Housing that do so much work in this space. With respect to the housing aspect, though, there are tools that we have to push down the gas harder on, like the Housing Production Trust Fund, like the Rent Supplement Program. And when I became a committee chair a year ago, I went line by line through the budgets of the agencies under the jurisdiction of my committee to find money to support those programs. But I've pushed further. I've insisted that we need to think outside the box. Since I've been on the council, I've been pushing us to use older commercial office buildings to convert into workforce and affordable housing. I think it's a doable plan that we have seen happen, just not with a focus on affordability. I recently introduced what I call the Golden Girls Bill to incentivize seniors in this city to rent out rooms affordably to other seniors so that we are preventing displacement and creating communities.
Time. I didn't mean to cut you off, but time. We gotta move on to the next question. So multiple members of the audience are concerned about COVID-19's impact on the budget, from childcare budgets being slashed to small businesses being affected. What is your budgetary solution post-COVID-19? For example, will you advocate for cuts to DC budgets as a result of lower tax revenue, or push for New Deal type spending? And how will you raise the revenue or find the cuts? Marcus, you up first?
Yeah, I think our response to COVID-19 has to be bold. We can't regress in our fight to really make this a more equitable city. And so for sure, we're going to have to prioritize, but we've got to prioritize investments in those things that are going to lift up the least of us in the city. It's going to mean also finding new sources for revenue. I'm in full support of taxing or increasing taxes on our wealthier residents so that they pay their fair share and we're able to find equitable solutions to protect people's work, to protect people's housing, to move people into jobs, and to make sure that folks aren't losing their businesses or their homes during this period. We've also got to double down on things like public education to make sure that as our students return to the classroom, they not only have high quality instruction, but also the mental health supports and all of the wraparound services that they need as we transition back. So there's a lot of things we need to do. I'm going to be bold in my focus on making sure we invest, and we'll find new revenue streams to do it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next up is Marcus Goodwin.
So thank you again. I think it's an incredible and probably the most important question we're facing. How do we handle this economic renaissance that we need to experience? I think we need to pass another small business grant to ensure that small local businesses such as our restaurants like Ben's Chili Bowl still have the opportunity to be here, and we don't have to lose the soul and culture of our city. In terms of finding ways to fund it, we have a rainy day fund that's robust in the district that we will likely have to dig into. There's also a lot of surplus funds that Events DC has that we can use, but I also want to ensure that we use our tools such as tax increment financing to help people that are small and local business owners have the funds up front so that they can invest in owning their real estate and owning their business outright instead of being a renter. I don't believe in someone being a generational business that continues to rent the property that they're in, which is usually the largest cost that they have. Finally, I want to add our fair share from federal government. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, particularly in my day job. Let me just say this. I feel like DC, we are in a better position than most cities to weather the economic storm that is coming. And I feel like this is not the time for us to cut the critical services that we need. The critical services like childcare, housing, access to healthcare, and then also support for our small locally owned businesses who are the lifeline. I'll also mention the need for supporting transit as well. I think the budget is all about finding balance. Like I said, DC is in a better position than most because we have been doing well over the last few years and have put money away. If this is not the time to use a rainy day fund, I don't know when the time is. And I'm not saying that we need to wipe it all out, but what I'm saying is that I feel like the council and the mayor can put their heads together to come up with a prudent plan that ensures that we don't have to cut critical services or raise exorbitant taxes in order for us to continue to provide what we need for DC residents. And as a council member, that's what I would be looking for. Pragmatic, innovative solutions that are focused on helping working families and children. Thank you.
Chandler?
My budget priorities reflect my core values. The budget shortfall will define the next 3 years. This is the new normal. We can't deplete our reserves and risk ending up under the control board, and we can't tax our way out of this. We must focus on 3 main tenets of the new normal. Health and safety. Focus on vulnerable populations, particularly seniors and those most at risk. And provide access to preventive health care and healthy foods. Education. We need to give our schools flexibility to be innovative and meet the following goals. Get our kids back into school, ensure that our schools are safe, and reimagine how our students will learn, both at school and at home with technology. But most importantly, economic independence. Without businesses, there are no jobs, and without worker safety, workers will not want to return. I know we can do both of these because we all want to reopen together. The district government should be a supportive partner, not a barrier to overcome.
Thank you. Next up is Ed.
So I've been following the DC budget for 20 years, and I've been through this 2 times before, and I've seen it over and over again that the ability to protect DC residents is really a matter of choice. It's whether our leaders commit to doing that. And I hope that we do, and as a council member, I certainly would do that. We know that Black and brown residents are bearing the brunt of this pandemic, and if we balanced our budget primarily with budget cuts, those residents would suffer even more. So instead of doing that, let's help the people who are suffering. Let's help address the digital divide and the students who've been left behind this school year. Let's help more people who are homeless get into their own home, which literally will save their lives. Let's help immigrants who got cut out of federal relief and then shamefully cut out of relief from the DC Council as well. I would not have let that happen. I put out a plan last week with some other candidates to use our 2019 surplus, to use half of the city's robust reserves, to continue the efforts that I helped start last year to close corporate tax loopholes that aren't doing any good for the city and are only funneling money into corporations, and find budget savings. If we do that, then we can save and protect DC residents in this pandemic.
Thank you, Ed. Next up is Janae.
Now is not the time to cut anything, and we don't have to. DC has 4 reserve accounts, and 2 of them we control the rules and those 2 total almost $900 million. So we need to waive those requirements and do 5 things. So I mentioned one earlier. We need to expand the emergency rental assistance program, including creating more staff to implement the program. I believe we need to cease new construction in the city and prioritize hiring DC residents who are slated for that new construction to do the recommended $343 million in repairs to public housing in the city. That'll help improve our health situation as well as employ DC residents. I think that we need to double the size of Cure the Streets. We can do that for less than $2 million and name all staff and volunteers as essential to help curb the rise in assaults that are happening in the city and strengthen the public health infrastructure. I also think that we need to expand our network of internet hotspots in the short term to allow students and non-students to better access the internet and use our MetroBus infrastructure to do that. And finally, we need to create the infrastructure now for bonds up to $5,000 that individuals can purchase and target the revenue from those bonds next fiscal year for businesses and individuals who are left out of federal stimulus, especially Black-owned and people of color-owned businesses and immigrants.
Rick?
Yeah, some estimates of the cuts to come in the next 2 years top over $1 billion. As the budget proposals come to the table, we must launch an inclusive economic recovery, one that both addresses the inequalities present long before the pandemic and those exacerbated because of it. But the government and the city does not need to do this by ourselves. In fact, we shouldn't. Our economic future does rest on the ability of public and private investment to work together towards a shared vision of renewal. It will require some investors to realize our potential in the city of historically disinvested places and actualize this into potential by replacing their short-term mindset with commitment to generating returns in the long term. We need to look at the mix of income housing and the densities in different areas that are in the mix and the affordable housing concentrated in wards in 7 and 8. We need to make sure that our neighborhoods look like our communities as a whole. And we need to put effort into that. We need to put effort.
Thank you, Rick.
Income housing. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next up is Will.
Yeah, we need to be bold in the recovery, absolutely. Austerity cannot be the way forward. Scarcity politics can't be the way forward. What's important is that we stop in Washington, D.C. wasting money. What we can't do post-pandemic is continue to give hundreds of millions of dollars to developers to build things that people can't access. I represent the tenants of Brooklyn Manor. That project triples density on site, reduces affordability, and eliminates large bedrooms. You know what the DC Council did? Every single member voted to give that developer $46 million. So the money's there. We just have to start using it to actually meet people's needs. That's going to be more important than ever post-pandemic. We have a platform that calls for a guaranteed jobs program, a New Deal style WPA guaranteed jobs program, and investment in public infrastructure, social housing to actually solve the affordable housing crisis. The revenue's there, we can get to it.
Thank you, Will. Monica?
Hi, well, having worked in DC government for 8 years, I can tell you how painful it is when budget cuts come rolling down the pike. It requires staff cuts. It requires cuts to critical services. So I don't support any cuts to programs that are needed to feed our working families, to provide healthcare or housing to our working families, or that would compromise in any way our ability to pay teachers and run our schools. And those costs are going to go up if we are truly committed to a quality education. I do believe that we have to protect our tax base in terms of businesses. We have to figure out new ways to reinforce and reinvent our economy. We have to have more safety nets for workers, but we also have to help businesses thrive. I think there's more we can do in terms of grants and loans and support to small businesses. That is going to be the lifeline of this recovery. And number two, I would emphasize that we have to think about these public works programs. I've been speaking to small business owners, and many of them are looking at
Monica.
Their business.
Thank you, appreciate it. Next up is Eric. Eric, are you on the line? Looks like we lost Eric, so we're gonna move on. Next up is Ann.
Yes, thank you. I think the COVID crisis has revealed a lot. One thing that didn't stop during COVID were the construction projects going on, including apartment buildings and other non-essential construction, as occurred in other cities. Other cities stopped that type of construction, and I think construction workers put at risk. So we know the developers have done well during this period, but it also revealed things we could do. We can put homeless people into housing if we need to. Obviously, they can't live in hotels all the time, but they can live in units that are made available by the city. We can support Housing First and those types of programs. I think the COVID crisis shows that we need to, in our budget, also support the public hospital, which needs to be built across the river, so there's good maternal care and other health care in all parts of the city. And just a quick plug, I work with the DC Bar Committee that's putting together a program on the budget, on the annual budget on the 21st with some of the city's budget representatives, and we'll try to make that program as widely available as possible. but we need to remember our core values of healthcare, education, and housing.
Thank you, Ann. Robert?
Thank you. We are this fiscal year facing a $700 million shortfall. That is no small amount. There are three things that we have to do. First, we have to spend down our rainy day fund to protect our residents and our small businesses. The argument against doing that is it will downgrade our credit rating. But I believe that if we see mass evictions and mass closures of our small businesses, not only will that be devastating to our city and our residents, but it will also be more devastating to our credit rating. We have to work together with our regional leaders. As vice chair of the Council of Governments, I've worked with the leaders from across the region to insist that Congress not only give DC the back money it owes from the CARES Act, but going forward, give more stabilizing funds to local governments like ours. We also have to do strong oversight. As a committee chair, I went line by line through the budgets of my committees and cut everything that wasn't fully justified and put that money toward education and housing. We're going to have to do that again here. But we also have to have a bottom line. Is anything that is on everything is on the table except education. Our kids deserve a chance that they have not gotten for generations, and we're not going to snatch that away from them now.
Okay, did I skip over you, Will? Okay, sorry about that. Just want to make sure. So we're going to move over to the 30-second round. So questions are, so candidates are going to have even less time to answer questions.
Hey, Jeremiah, can I get my chance?
Sure, go ahead. The question is about, did you hear the question?
Yes,
Yeah,
DC budget and COVID. Sorry,
post-COVID.
Sorry
Okay.
about that, folks. I have poor internet service, so I'm fading in and out. But similar to what Monica had mentioned earlier before I got disconnected, I think I'm one of the only ones on the panel that has over 20 years of experience in government, worked as a council staffer, legislative aide, and chief of staff in my earlier years, and as a DC government executive for the last 15. So working with the district budget is a core expertise that I have. And in my focus, education, small businesses, and workforce development would not be cut. We need to ensure, like Councilmember White said, to ensure our children, have the best quality education they can. And for our small businesses, we need to ensure that they have the tools that they need to recover and reinvigorate themselves from this pandemic. We need to increase our capacity building training to help them readjust their business practices, give them access to capital and credit building programs, as well as increase some opportunities for our CBEs. And similarly with our workforce development programs, I would make sure that we have all the funds that we need to retrain our workers in this new normal and to ensure that they can have the skills that they need to get back to work.
So now we're going to move over to the 30-second round. So candidates will have 30 seconds to answer these set of questions. Now we're actually going to go in reverse. So now we're going to actually start with Robert. And so the first question of the 30-second round is coming from Scott on teacher retention. So DC has the highest rate of teacher turnover in the country. What is your concrete steps that would take to improve teacher retention in Washington, D.C.?
Thank you for that. Most folks know I'm not very shy on education issues because where we are is not good enough for our children. The State Board of Education took the lead in doing a teacher retention study that showed us what we already knew, that we are losing significantly more teachers than the rest of the country. I have pushed the chancellor as a condition of me voting for his nomination that he agreed to review the impact evaluation, which is the biggest thing causing us to lose qualified teachers, both because of downgrades in their impact rating and because of a fear of a grading system that frankly is not fair and is very arbitrary. So I want us to move away from impact, readjust it to focus it on retaining strong teachers who care about our children.
Ann, you're up,
Yes.
30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. When I was on the school board in the mid-90s, teachers were really laboring under difficult conditions. They had school buildings that were not habitable and which finally were repaired. I have to give the Fenty administration credit for that. But teachers have been under fire ever since then. Michelle Rhee, fired teachers and principals. Other systems of accountability have just been far too strict. And I want to hear what Marcus Batchelor says about this, but it's my understanding that this new Relay program, which is a quote unquote professional development.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Eric, you got 30 seconds, teacher retention.
Thank you. Well, my mom's a former DCPS educator, so this is issue is very near and dear to my heart. And I think one of the main ways that we retain our teachers is pay them well. You know, make sure that the teachers are paid, you know, what they're worth. Second way that I think that we can help maintain our teacher retention is by looking at the evaluation system. I was around when Michelle Reed came through and laid havoc to our school system. So looking at some of those policies and how we evaluate our teachers would be something that I would look at to help increase our retention rate.
Thank you. Next up is Monica, 30 seconds, teacher retention.
I think the bigger problem is that our schools are under too much pressure to perform. There's too much testing, too many requirements for schools. We are centers for our families and our communities, and that carries over to the teachers. We need schools that can provide more wraparound services to families that need them, because the stories that I hear are that teachers not only have to provide emotional support and learning support, but sometimes, you know, worry about health care and the safety of their children. So we have to give schools the capacity.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica.
Sure.
Will, 30 seconds, teacher retention.
To build strong schools, we need to build strong communities. You don't build strong communities by disinvesting in them in an attempt to drive the existing residents out so you can build luxury units where communities used to be. Children being recycled in and out of homelessness constantly, children being treated as less than results in unhealthy systems and makes it hard on teachers. Invest in communities from the ground up and you'll have better teacher retention because the schools will be healthier.
Thank you, Rick.
First, we need to show importance to teachers by putting them on committees like the Reopen Committee and show up the priority that they have. Second, we need to, in many schools, there is an environment where teachers are expected to do everything, often with few resources. When teachers leave, the kids are left out without stability, is worried about where he can lead. For me, I have the understanding of the unique needs of the teachers as a college professor and administrator and understand the education needs behind it.
Thank you, Rick. Janae, teacher retention, 30 seconds.
So retention starts with recruitment. My mother was a DC public schools teacher in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Some of the conditions that she faced are worse than many of our teachers are facing now. And yet I think that the difficult conditions that teachers face make it difficult for them to do their jobs. So I think incentivizing opportunities for them to live in the city, again, incentivizing housing opportunities, leveraging our school properties to have some of those wraparound services so so teachers don't have to provide mental health services and other social services is important, and making sure that we're recruiting teachers who are deeply invested in our students.
My two sons went to DC public schools, and when they were in middle school at Stewart Hobson, they lost their favorite teacher who left, and she made it very clear it was because of the stresses that DCPS put on her. Fortunately, she actually came back later and was Teacher of the Year just a few years ago. The two things that I think are most important to teacher retention are giving our teachers more voice in the impact evaluation system where they currently have none through the union contract. And second is stopping DCPS from putting added obligations on teachers without giving them any extra time to do their work. They already work hard enough. We shouldn't make it any harder than they work now.
Chandra.
Teachers are obviously the most important asset for any school. And studies have shown that after the third year, they often burn out because we're not treating them as professionals. We need to give them the professional development and view them as true professionals that they are and provide them an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to mature and do more with the resources we give them.
Marcus, good one.
Thank you again. My mother is currently a DCPS teacher, and over the past few years, we've seen that in 5 years, our neighborhood schools lose about 80% of the teachers. So the two things that I would focus on is first, ensuring that the impact evaluation doesn't add unnecessary stress and anxiety for teachers, and two, ensuring that the financial challenges that teachers face are addressed by ensuring that we continually increase their pay and also provide housing, because only about 51% of DC teachers live in the city. That needs to be improved.
Thank you. Marcus, Bachelor?
Sure. Yeah, I'm proud to have led on this issue from the State Board of Education and really brought this to the center of a conversation when nobody on the Education Committee or the Mayor's office didn't want to address it. So I'll tell you what our teachers have already said they need from us. They said that they need an end to impact. They say they need better professional development and better opportunities for professional advancement. They need mentorship. And at its base, what they need for our teachers to be successful is for their students to have everything they need to be successful. That's wraparound service, mental health supports, and every resource they need inside the classroom. And I'll fight for that on the council.
Thank you, Marcus. Next 30-second question comes from Rachel.
Hey, Jeremiah, you skipped me.
Oh, sorry, Christina. Christina, go ahead. Sorry about that.
No problem. There are any number of reasons that teachers leave the profession. My grandmother was a retired special education teacher. There are three things that I think that the council can focus on. One is workforce housing to give teachers the ability to actually live and work in the city. The second is to provide more professional development and management training for school leaders, because we know that that plays a large role into the work that happens in the classroom. And then finally, I think that the council should provide additional funding supports to provide behavioral health professionals available for teachers, not to train them, but to also provide support. Being a teacher is a spiritual journey, and they need support in the same way that we provide for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. So next question comes from Rachel. How do we get to 0 homicides in DC? So this is on homicides in the city. It comes from Rachel. How do we get to 0 homicides in DC? Robert, you're up first.
Thank you. Underlying our crime epidemic are three main issues: housing stability, education, and jobs. There is no way, I repeat, no way that we will have successfully addressed crime in our city, especially violent crime, without addressing these three issues. We have tried over and over and over again to take shortcuts to focus on law enforcement and prosecution. It's not going to get us there. We have to, and I wrote a letter to the mayor at the beginning of the budget season, insisting that the only way we could address crime was by making these three elements the priority in her budget. If we do that, we will push down crime. I can't promise we will get to 0 homicides, but I promise we will do better than where we are now.
Thank you. Ann?
Yes, well, the Statehood Green Party is a supporter of the NEAR Act reforms, which say that policing should have a light touch, and we should address crime as a mental health issue and try to intervene in those ways. So we support full funding and implementation of the NEAR Act. I think the various peacemaker programs and the ONSI programs that are going on right now are very positive. We need to do more of that. It's my understanding there's like 2 competing programs, but we need more of that. And also going back to the children, a quality of life and safe passage to and from school.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it. Next is Eric. How do we address homicides in DC? You got 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Well, I believe in using a whole of government approach to public safety, starting with the use of using a public health approach to identify and abate the root causes of crime and violence. And also, though, I am a firm believer in community policing. You know, I was around when Charles Ramsey implemented community policing here in the district, and it was really successful. I also would strengthen existing programs and offices that deal directly with residents who are likely to be just as involved to help redirect the behaviors, because I do feel if we invest earlier, we can significantly reduce their exposure to the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Eric. Monica, how do we address homicides? 30 seconds.
I agree with Councilmember White. Housing, education, and jobs are the keys. For the first 5 years of my career, I worked with gang-involved youth and youth affected by the juvenile justice system. And once their spirits are broken at a young age, it takes a lot to help young people find a new path. And those are often the ones that either become victims of violent crime or the perpetrators. So we absolutely have to invest in education and jobs so these young people have something to live for.
Thank you so much. Will, how do we address homicides in DC? 30 seconds. Will, unmute you.
Sorry. Jobs, education, housing, obviously, but we have to understand that we are destabilizing entire communities. I talked earlier about Brooklyn Manor, which I've been involved in with the last 8 years. We are ripping that community apart, displacing people. Berry Farm is torn down. People are displaced. When people are destabilized, when communities are destabilized, it leads to bad outcomes. We, not too long ago, placed homeless families in an abandoned hospital between a jail and an STD clinic. If you treat children that way, you have to take a public health approach to repair that trauma in order to reduce bad outcomes on the back end of things.
Thank you, Will. Rick, addressing homicides, 30 seconds.
Yeah, every life is precious, and we're moving too many of our young people to violence, especially gun violence. We cannot police our way out of this. It comes down to mental health support, education, and creating more jobs, training, and opportunity for the most vulnerable residents. We also need to improve relations between police and the community. In too many cases, trust has been broken, and it makes it more difficult to achieve this change. As a Ward 8 resident, I see this all the time. For some reason, we allow this crime and violence to be concentrated in these certain communities. And we need to ask that question of why we're allowing.
Thank you, Rick. Janae, homicides, 30 seconds.
In the short term, as I mentioned before, I would expand programs like Cure the Streets that do direct intervention and conflict resolution. But in the long term, I think it's not enough to just provide jobs in order to find an economic solution, but to invite people into the vision for our city. So I would prioritize cooperative models of economic growth, inviting people to be business owners and to build collective wealth, because if one person is able to achieve wealth, but the rest of the community is left behind, that actually is not solving the problem.
Chander, 30 seconds.
Yeah, crime is a manifestation of the lack of opportunities in our communities. The promises not being kept and continuously being let down. I remember this from the Latin American Youth Center, and it's the lack of economic independence and education. When an education system that leads to the streets, not a career, that's when crime happens. It's a call for desperation. And my experience on the Jobs Coalition has shown me that we can provide job opportunities and education through vocational education, and leads to a pathway to success.
Jeremiah, you skipped me.
Ed,
Yeah.
30 seconds.
Sure. Well, this question reminds me of Pastor Delonte Golston of the Peace Fellowship Church in Deanwood and the Peace Walks that he does, where he just walks through the community to talk to people to understand what their challenges are. And I sort of think, what if that were the entire DC government rather than just our clergy? What if that were our approach to helping communities be more stable and safe? When I served on a task force last year around the DC jail, we didn't talk about the structure of the jail. We talked about investments in mental health, in affordable housing, and jobs as the keys to making our community safer. And I agree that's the right goal. So if I'm a DC council member, I'm going to listen to the community about what the stresses are there and then work to address them. And that's my way of creating more community safety.
Thank you. Chander, homicides in DC, 30 seconds.
I already went.
Oh, sorry, Christina, 30 seconds, homicides in DC. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I think that we need a holistic approach to our public safety challenges that we have in the city, where all parts of the government are coming together to marshal a solution. So education, jobs, mental health, healthcare, infrastructure, all of these things need to be part of the conversation and solution, because I feel like a lot of times the crime that we're seeing in the city is sometimes is crime out of desperation and inability to sort of resolve issues and challenges that they have with interpersonal, with other people in their community. And so I feel like we're never going to get to a solution if all parts of the government are not working towards the same goal.
Thank you. Marcus Goodwin.
We need to address the underlying causes of crime before they occur. Those are underemployment, job training opportunities, providing adult education, providing affordable childcare, and treating addiction and mental illness when it occurs instead of sending the police. By the time the police arrive and a crime has occurred, it's far too late. We need to invest in more community policing solutions like violence interrupters and Cure the Streets, and take on more policy like the NEAR Act to ensure that community policing methods are carried throughout our communities.
Marcus Batchelor.
Yeah, sitting from where I'm sitting and serving where I do, I've seen too many friends and too many students I serve be both perpetrators and victims. And so I know we do need to address gun violence as a public health crisis. That means bold investment in research, intervention, prevention, and trauma recovery. And it also means realizing that gun violence is a comorbidity of the deep inequalities in our city. So we do have to lift folks out of poverty. We do have to give our young people a quality education. We do have to give them the mental health supports that they need to be successful. And so that's what I'll invest in as well.
Thank you so much. So our next question, how will you implement green community practices citywide? In 30 seconds, what is your citywide environmental vision? Starting with Robert.
Thank you. I'm very proud to have been endorsed for a second time by the Sierra Club. The primary thing we have to focus on is education. There are too many communities who frankly have issues that have made recycling not be their priority for many years, and we really have to focus on education. That means connecting people to our city, to our rivers, understanding how our waterways are impacted, how our air quality is impacted by our actions and by the pollutions that we put into there. I also have focused on green infrastructure around our public buildings, and I have a bill that's in the process of being passed that will put solar and wind energy on all of our DC government buildings.
Thank you. Anne, your environmental platform in 30 seconds.
Yes, well, because the Statehood Green Party stands for environmental reform. I think DC is actually a leader in a lot of areas, you know, recycling, our LEED buildings, LED, we're leaders in that area. I think we need to focus on preserving green space, and that goes along with the gentrification discussion. I live right within eyesight of Walter Reed, and there's going to be a little town center in Walter Reed within the next few years. But what about McMillan Park? Maybe McMillan Park should be preserved as a green space that families can use. You can have games there and so forth. So we don't need to get rid of the green space and then we're going around trying to create parks after we've lost that.
Eric, your environmental platform in 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, I used to work, as a lot of you know, at DCRA, and one of the things that I did was help to establish the green building program at DCRA. So my focus on, you know, environmental policy would be focusing on, you know, getting our buildings, more of our buildings LEED certified, LEED Gold, and working through the building permit process to really tackle a lot of the energy inefficiency that we have in our buildings. I know that the council has passed the renewable energy standards, you know, to take effect later on in the decade, but looking at those types of policies to increase our environmental awareness. Thank you.
Next up is Monica, your environmental platform in 30 seconds.
Yes, I also support more funding for programs that preserve green space and programs like the River Smart program. The Department of Energy and Environment does a fantastic job in terms of providing DC homeowners access to trees and the wildlife that we need to preserve our ecosystem in DC. But I also think we need to help our young students become ambassadors for the environment. And there are schools that are excellent models like Mundo Verde Public Charter School that do this, and more schools could be doing this.
Thank you. Will, your environmental platform?
I mean, we're running on a Green New Deal, so we want to build thousands of units of social housing that are using the latest green technologies. We have a housing stock right now in Washington, D.C. that is rotten. I worked at Congress Heights, representing Congress Heights Tenant Association. There was a slumlord, Sanford Capital ran those buildings that had terrible environmental impacts on the people living there. So not only environmental impacts, green mold, slum conditions have an impact on people, not just the environment writ large. But we're going to create jobs and we're going to create social housing with the latest green technology.
Thank you, Will. Rick, your environmental platform, citywide.
Yeah, we need to keep programs going in the city like River Smart, using the Anacostia River Works that is run by a local resident and grew up in Kenilworth. We need to continue to give incentives for green roof programs, solar reimbursement programs. We need to preserve our historical spaces and green spaces with more accessibility, LEED certifications. Across the board, we need to look at this as a holistic plan and not just one thing will resolve all of our problems, but look at it holistically.
Janae, environmental platform.
We already have the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act on the books, and the aspect around private buildings, the Building Energy Performance Standard is going to have the biggest impact. And so I would put energy to make sure that happens. I use River Smart Homes program, but here in Ward 7, the wait time to get it implemented is almost a year. And most of my neighbors don't know about it. And so we need to improve marketing and also focus job training to prepare people, especially residents of Ward 7 and 8, to start their own businesses to implement the activities and the actions in those programs.
Chandler, environmental platform.
Yeah, I think we have some good programs with the River Smart program and planting 1,000 trees a year. But what we don't do is never finish the job. We don't get more of our district residents involved in environmental jobs, and we don't water the trees, so half of them die. That's wasting money. I think we can do more by finding open spaces. And I think the COVID-19 crisis has shown we need more open spaces for social distancing and be able to use for both recreation purposes as well as job opportunities.
Absolutely. Christina.
Yeah, I'm supportive of green infrastructure in our public streetscapes, and also using that for public and private buildings and things like that going forward. I also think that the council is going to need to do some increased oversight in terms of ensuring that Metro Board and WMATA actually hold up their end of the bargain in terms of moving over to an energy efficient fleet for buses, and the same with DC Public Schools and sort of moving to an energy efficient fleet for their school buses as well. And so I think those are a couple of areas that I would be focused on.
Ed.
So 2 years ago, I was part of the Put a Price on It coalition, where we were trying to get a carbon fee and rebate program in the district. It turned into the Clean Energy DC program with the ambitious goal of 100% renewable energy by 2032. I also was part of a task force that was working to develop the plans for Solar for All to bring solar to 100,000 low-income residents. Those are really ambitious goals. They take money and they take oversight, and that's really what we need next. And that's what I want to do as a DC council member. I think it's also important to make public transit more affordable and more reliable so that people actually start using it.
Thank you, Ed. Marcus Goodwin, environmental platform.
I have solar panels on the roof of my house, and I believe the council needs to double down on its investments, funding solar tax credits for residential properties. We also need to improve building energy performance standards for our commercial properties throughout the city, and create a carbon taxing legislation for our commercial properties. That's another way that we can create and generate revenue to bridge our budget gap this year. Finally, we need to make a requirement of LEED Green certification for all commercial development that's new and upcoming in the city.
Yeah, so I'm proud to represent the district on the Chesapeake Bay Local Government Advisory Committee, and on the council, I'll continue to be a regional leader to make sure all resources are brought to bear to address our current crisis. I also believe we need bold investment in a workforce system that supports green jobs and invests deeply in green infrastructure. And we can't talk about climate change without talking about environmental justice. And so we have to invest in communities to make sure that as climate change bears down, it doesn't disproportionately impact our most vulnerable residents. And obviously, I believe we've got to, well, my time's up, but transportation infrastructure is also important as well.
Thank you. So now we're actually going to move into the raise your hands portion of the event. So if candidates support this, if candidates say yes, raise your hand. If you're no, keep your hand down. So
Do you
first,
mind if I'm verbal?
yeah, we'll give you a chance to say yes or no, Eric.
Thank you.
So first question, this is lightning round, comes from Kim. Have you ever been a registered Republican, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Childcare professionals are essential workers. Show of hands, who will commit to finding the $20 million we need for Birth to 3? Raise your hand for yes.
Yes.
If you were on a council, would you have voted to extend the school year for the Washington metropolitan students? Yes or no? Raise your hand for yes.
Yes.
Do you support ranked choice voting? Okay. Will you support sex work decriminalization in office?
Yes.
Will you be in favor of making UDC tuition free?
Yes.
Would you increase funding to the arts for local artists, art entities, and art venues independent of funding the Commission of Arts and Humanities? Would you support automatic voter expungement for arrests where no charges were filed and for non-convictions?
Yes.
Would you support legislation to prohibit fossil fuel use in newly constructed and renovated buildings in DC?
Could you repeat that?
Sorry. Would you support legislation to prohibit fossil fuel use in newly constructed, renovated buildings in DC? Okay. If Jack Evans is on the council when you join it, would you vote to expel him? Will you support lowering the voting age to 16?
No.
If you're on the council right now, would you vote to overturn Initiative 70?
Overturn what?
If you're on the council right now, would you vote to overturn Initiative 77? Yes or no? Okay. Would you delay implementation or cut funding from the Paid Leave Fund program to support COVID-19 recovery efforts? Yes or no? So no, so everyone's no. Okay. If you were on the council, would you vote for the Fair Elections Bill to publicly fund elections in DC? Yes or no? Do you support all mail-in elections for DC?
Yes.
Do you think we should ban or limit contractors who get government grants from donating in elections?
No.
Do you support limiting council members' ability to have investments in companies to have contracts with the DC government?
Yes.
Do you support increased budget transparency for charter schools?
Yes.
Would you be in favor of building a prison in Washington, a new prison in DC? Yes or no?
Yes.
I want to reject the premise of the question. I know that's like against the rules, but.
Yeah. So that's it. We're going to we're going to wrap up. That's it with the yes or no questions. I really appreciate it, everyone. So now we're actually going to go into closing statements. We're going to go into closing statements. So we're starting with you, Robert.
How long do we have for the closing statements?
90 seconds.
I want to again thank DC for Democracy for holding this debate. I want to thank actually all the candidates. Running for public office is a scary thing, and we need people who are bold enough to stand up and take that challenge. And I appreciate all my colleagues on this panel doing that in a really smart way. In the time that I've been on the council, I have been focused on transparency, accountability, and integrity. And I hope and believe that people have seen that throughout my 3.5 years on the council, that I have been dogged against inequity and inequality, that I have spoken up and will continue to speak up when something is not right. We need people on the council more than ever who are willing to do that, because the coronavirus epidemic not only requires us to rely on each other more than we ever have, but it shines a bright light on inequities in our city. And if we are not aggressive and affirmative in addressing these inequalities during and after the coronavirus, coronavirus, then the future after coronavirus will look no different than the past, and the effects will fall disproportionately on communities of color. I'm asking for your vote in the primary on June 2nd and in the general election in November. Again, I'm Robert White, DC Democratic at-large council member.
Ann?
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm Ann Wilcox, Statehood Green Party, so I'll be on the ballot in November, a lawyer and community activist on statehood and many other issues. I think one thing that we say, DC is a rich city. We're in the black ever since the control board came in. We've had a balanced budget, but what is that money really going for? Are we using it to fund human services? Are we using it to repair public housing, which we really haven't addressed enough tonight, with young people living in molded conditions and rat-infested conditions? Are we using it to maintain our affordable housing before it falls into disrepair? And the schools, I thought it was interesting. This is not a dig at the mayor. I think the mayor is working hard on the COVID, but the Ellen Show gave laptops and iPads to Randall Highlands Elementary School last year. Why did the Ellen Show have to come in and give laptops to one of our elementary schools if we're doing as well as we say we are? So I think it's an issue of sometimes cutting the fat that's in government and redirecting the money to where it needs to be, to youth and to families. Thank you.
Eric?
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for listening to our conversation. Really appreciate it. The reason why I'm running is I want to ensure that we have safer streets, we further education reform, develop a vibrant economy. I have 2 decades of experience, as I mentioned earlier, as a dedicated public servant. Working in the city council as a legislative aide, chief of staff to a ward council member. I've run city government agencies. I've been chief of staff at another government agency. So I have the knowledge, experience, and determination to solve our most pressing challenges. My values for the city are very straightforward. Accept people for who they are, build a network of support, and create a community of shared wealth. And I feel that by following these principles and by working together, we can have a city where every resident has a path of prosperity, no matter the neighborhood. So I invite everyone to come and join my campaign. Head over to my social media accounts at Rogers for DC 51 or my website, rogersfordc.com, and let's start a conversation. Again, I really appreciate the time, and I really appreciate the thoughtful conversation that we had, and I look forward to seeing my colleagues on the campaign trail and meeting the voters. Thanks again.
Monica?
Thank you, everyone, for this thoughtful evening. And I want to share that after 30 years of living and working and leading the District of Columbia, I believe I'm the most qualified candidate for the at-large position. And I want to earn your vote and your trust this coming November. And I say this because there are a couple of topics we haven't hit on tonight very much, which is immigrants, and the fact that when we come upon tough economic times, as we've seen across the country, our most vulnerable and marginalized communities bear the brunt of that. And as we've seen, immigrants have been left out of the equation many times. And I'm tired of not having a voice on the council for our immigrant communities, whether they are business leaders, whether they are working families, or whether they are the undocumented invisible workforce. We need a voice that speaks to their interests. And I believe I can bring that voice. And I'm also concerned about the polarization happening in our city. So I will bring an approach that is collaborative and that is about coalition building, because we will be pitted against each other. As a city that's already divided, we're going to have to find a way to find strength and unity and solidarity so that we can build a blueprint that works for everyone and leaves no one behind, because we are a world-class city and we deserve world-class leadership. So I hope that you'll support me, and you can visit my website at monicaforalldc.org to learn more about me, my experience, and my campaign.
Thank you. Will?
I'm going to close tonight by painting a picture of our new Green Deal recovery. Imagine this with me. We recover tax cuts from the wealthy to build a jobs program, employing people out of work in our new social housing agency. Together, we plan, collect community input, and conduct impact studies. Instead of giving away public land, we build social housing on it all around the district. We lead the country in green building techniques, translating residents' needs into beautiful new homes with family-sized units and green spaces. residents of all incomes flock to social housing, drawn by the promise that they will only pay 25% of their income in rent. Our initial investment begins to pay off immediately. The mixture of rents, instead of going to developers, pays for building maintenance and repays our capital investment. Permanently affordable rents put extra money in people's pockets to spend in their communities, reinvigorating the local economy. Affordable first floor retail spaces house small businesses, giving them a chance to recover and thrive. For the first time in a decade, families begin to move off the housing wait list. School attrition east of the river slows and then stops. We recover and we're stronger than before. This common sense regenerative housing model is the obvious path forward. The efficiency of social housing has been proven all over the world, and unlike the current model, actually works for everyone. We just need to fight for it. Join us at Will FORDC 4DC. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick?
I know the struggles of our small business owners because I understand what it takes to make a payroll. I understand the challenges facing our educators because I've been in the classroom and helped thousands of first-generation college students like myself receive access to college education. I know the issues facing Washingtonians east of the river because they are my neighbors, loved ones, and friends. I understand the challenges of running a business, raising a family, and making ends meet. I have spent my career in the trenches getting things done and not just showing up when it's convenient. I'm here as a veteran with a mission. I'm running for at-large seat to unite the city, bring accountability back to the government, and make the district work for Washingtonians who have invested so much into the city. Today, more than ever, we need doers. We actually need doers. We don't need more of the same. I have watched the previous weeks, so many residents have lost their jobs and trying to survive, trying to stay healthy, trying to make sure their kids don't fall behind. But I constantly hear is promising the same broken promises, bickering about stolen campaign signs, and people digging through candidates' trash. We don't need the same special interest out-of-touch officials telling us who to support in this election. Our government needs doers, collaborative leadership to get the job done. Together, you and I, we can build the change we want to see in the district. I hope to have your support in November and in these days ahead. Stay connected with me, with my campaign by visiting murfreedc.com.
Tanner?
I think you skipped me, Jeremiah.
Okay, Janae, sorry about that.
No problem. Again, I'm Janae Lewis, and we know that organizers think differently. We don't have enough people with community organizing backgrounds and experiences in our government right now, and we see that. Organizers think about the intersections. So when we're talking about what does it mean to help our city recover in COVID-19, it's not just about physical health. It's about our neighbors' income. It's about our children's education, our own mental health, and our physical safety. This is our home. DC is our home. This is our vision, and this is our time. And more than ever, we need someone like me, who is a Black woman who lives in Ward 7, goes to church in Ward 1, went to high school in Ward 3, and volunteers all over the city with my sorority. I know what it takes to be a person who has neighbors and who has experienced people who are hit the hardest by what's happening, but still be able to talk to some of the most powerful and wealthiest people in our city to build coalition and get things done. And so we need folks who can think outside the box. Again, this is Janae Lewis at Large City Council, and I hope that you will vote for me this fall and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Ms. Janae Lewis.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. Chandler, you're up the bat.
Sure, I think it's Ed, but that's okay. I can start. Thank you, DC Democracy, for hosting this forum and all those of you who are tuning in online. Our city is at a critical juncture. Even before this crisis, we had issues that separated us between those who have and those who deserve better, like housing, job opportunities, and education inequity. We want a city that agrees with our values, a government that works for us and with us, listens to our needs, and delivers on the promises that it makes. These are still our goals, but now the mountain we have to climb is just a little bit steeper. These long-standing issues have been highlighted even more under the pandemic, and the available options made harder by the loss of $1.5 billion in revenue. Inspired by my mom, who brought us to the U.S. from India, I've been driven by a calling to pay it forward. We're not going to solve the problems the same old way, turning to your old knee-jerk reactions to spend more without thinking of the consequences. We need a new way of thinking. Someone who has been an independent for many years, not out of convenience, a true independent. I've dedicated my career to creating opportunities for young people struggling for a second chance, for people with disabilities to be included in everyday life, and to enhance the safety of our city through our work in emergency preparedness. I've made it my mission to solve problems and help get results by convening businesses, neighbors, and agency commissions from across the city. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and carve a new pathway that is progressive, practical, and pragmatic. I'm Chandra J. Raman, and I humbly ask for your vote on November 3rd. For more information, go to www.chander2020.com. Thank you again.
And Ed, I know I keep skipping over you, Ed. You know, the
No
whole
love,
night,
Maya.
no
No
love.
love.
You know, but I'm gonna let you go, Ed. So you're up.
Well, I'm still going to thank DC for Democracy for holding this forum tonight. I want to thank every engaged voter for joining us. It has been great to hear a lot of community questions, but I would love to hear even more. So I hope you'll check out my website, which is ed4dc.com, F-O-R. But I'd also just love to hear from you directly. My email address is elazier@ed4dc.com. Please reach out. I guess I just want to end by saying this is like an incredibly scary time for all of us. We are all worried about our health and the health of our loved ones. We're worried about essential workers, people in grocery stores, nurses, about their health, people in a DC jail and homeless shelters, how we're going to help our students who've fallen behind because they don't have technology at home. These are enormous challenges that I don't think any of us on this panel has all the answers to right now. But what we need are leaders with values and commitments to be able to find the resources to make sure that we're helping DC residents through this crisis. So I look forward to this challenge. I want to be part of the solution to the city coming out of this crisis as strong as possible and making sure that every DC resident is protected, that nobody loses their home, that people get back to work quickly, that every small business is preserved. That's what I'm aiming for, and that's why I want to be on the DC Council. Thank you so much.
Christina, I'm not going to skip you this time. Don't worry. I'm going to let you go.
We're not going to hold it against you. Thank you to DC for Democracy, and thank you for everyone who tuned in this evening. This was a great conversation and discussion, and it is an honor and a privilege to be a part of this panel of excellent public servants who are looking to fight on behalf of district residents everywhere. For me, this race is personal. I love this city, and I felt like that walking around my neighborhood and walking around other parts of the city, seeing the change that is happening, but not everyone is benefiting from it. And I feel like we have some council members who aren't necessarily focused on the human elements of the cost of the policy decisions that they're making. And I feel like it's important to bring that voice back to the council. Right now I work in national government, but some of the most passionate work that I did was for the 5 years that I worked on behalf of the city of DC. As a staffer for the DC Council, I've drafted and helped pass over 40 different pieces of legislation that have helped move the city forward. Some of the most passionate work that I did, the ability to hear from our neighbors and community members about problems that we're facing and try to draft solutions and get to help see that change that they need to see happen. It was always gratifying to see programs be implemented and then you are able to see the change that you were part of. I want to get back to that. I want to get back to that work. I want to get back to the work on behalf of my neighbors, my community, my family, and all of you. And so I'm asking for the ability to have a conversation and to continue this conversation to keep going forward, because I want to spend over the next couple of months the opportunity to earn your vote, to earn your trust, and to earn your support. My name is Christina Henderson. I'm at ChristinaHenderson.org. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Christina. Marcus Goodwin.
Thank you again, DC for Democracy, for hosting us tonight. My name is Marcus Goodwin. I'm a member of DC for Democracy, and I appreciate this platform and the 300 plus people that have tuned in tonight. I grew up here in DC, in Columbia Heights. Again, the fifth of 8 children. My mother came here from Dakar, Senegal, to help bring her children the opportunity to pursue the American dream. But growing up in Columbia Heights, it's the most rapidly gentrifying neighborhood in the country since the year 2000. I saw friends, family members, community members have to go because there wasn't an adequate housing stock, there weren't good enough paying jobs, and there wasn't a safe community that people felt comfortable in. In the 2000 census, Columbia Heights was 72% African American. Today, it's below 30%. I'm different from every other candidate because I have a plan. I have a 6-point plan, in fact. I talked to you earlier about financial responsibility and the ways that I would bridge the budget gap. I talked about eradicating DC's food deserts by creating economic incentives. I talked about addressing crimes and the underlying causes. Also, I want to ensure that we have better education. Of the 8 children in my family, 4 attended public schools here and 4 attended private schools. We all had different educational needs, and we need a complete school system that provides for everyone. Again, I have the most experience in economic development and providing housing, so these aren't just words, they're solutions. Please follow me at GoodWinForDC on social media and goodwinfordc.com. Thank you and have a good night.
Before we let you go, Marcus, I'm gonna let Eric go real quick. Eric's on the line. Eric, you want to go? 90 seconds, closing statement. Eric, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still there. I already went.
Okay. Sorry about that, Marcus.
No,
Sorry, y'all. It's been a long night.
No,
I'll take the extra time now. Don't get me wrong.
So I'm gonna let Marcus close us out tonight. So Marcus, take it away.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jeremiah. And I want to thank DC4D again for having us tonight. I really want to just end by leaving everyone with a clear example of the crisis we're facing and the important decision we have to make on November 3rd. In some Northwest DC neighborhoods, the life expectancy is somewhere around 94 years old. In Congress Heights, where I'm from and still live today, the life expectancy is just 67, a gap of nearly 3 decades. Now, more than ever, we can't just talk about the communities we continue to fail without actually uplifting the voices from those communities. Nationally, we saw that the progressive message isn't translating with some voters in our most marginalized communities. We can't charge forward without first doing the necessary work to build with and engage those who our policies stand to benefit the most. Again and again, our neighbors have been told to get back in line and wait their turn. But young people underserved in school and unsafe on our streets and working residents without fair wages on the job don't have time. Communities without reliable transit networks and access to bike lanes, and seniors without reliable housing to ensure their right to age in place don't have time. I've done the hard work of bringing neighbors together from every section of the city to fight for the type of opportunity that we all deserve. This city means so much to me. And if you send me to the council, I promise I'll fight every day for a city that truly works for all of us. Thank you so much for listening tonight, and please join us and sign up to volunteer at marcusfordc.com. Thanks.
Let me close out tonight by saying I really appreciate all the candidates for being on tonight. I'm a former candidate myself, and so I know the stress of the process, and so I know you're putting a lot of your time and your effort into this process, and so I really appreciate each and every one of you who took the time to be here tonight. Make sure you show the candidates some love, because this isn't an easy thing. They take a lot of the time out of their day to run for office, and so we got to make sure we show the candidates love. And so again, I really appreciate all the candidates for being on tonight. Thank you to the DC4D steering committee for putting together this debate. Let me also quickly say this will not be the last debate of the election season. There will be community groups, there will be labor groups, there'll be groups throughout the city that will be holding debates to get and listen to candidates throughout this process. And so I really encourage everyone to show up to other debates, to email the candidates if you have any questions that you need to ask them. Reach out to them because now is the time. So we have 6 months to election day. Show up at a forum, ask a candidate a question, get involved. I know we're dealing in the current COVID-19 situation where a lot of folks are at home, but if you have access to a computer, make sure you email the candidates. A lot of the questions that were not asked tonight, we'll make sure that we will include some of these questions in our questionnaire that will go out to the candidates within the next few weeks. And so we'll make sure that the candidates answer some of these questions. And so some of the questions that did not get asked tonight include questions on immigrant rights, include questions on housing. So we will ensure that a lot of these questions that you're really concerned about get included in our questionnaire that will get sent out to the candidates. So we'll ensure that the candidates have opportunity to respond to some of these questions that were not asked tonight. But once again, I know I keep thanking the candidates. I probably thank you like 1,000 times just because I know how stressful it is to be the candidate. So I'm going to thank the candidates again for being on tonight. Thank the steering committee. Thank our audience for being on. Thank everyone who submitted a question, even if your question was not asked. I really appreciate you taking the time to be a part of the political process. Make sure you stay safe out there. And being a chair for DC for Democracy, I want to say I really appreciate everyone tonight, and thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Good night.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jeremiah,
Stay safe, everyone.
Peace out. Good night, guys.
Good job, everyone.